Hi, Mark, and today we have to talk about the state of the British economy and what the government plans to curb the cost of living crisis. Despite a slightly better than expected economic outlook, people in Britain are facing what is arguably the biggest fall in their standard of living in almost 70 years. This is the result of an estimate by the Independent Budget Authority OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility. According to this, Great Britain can avoid a recession, but disposable household income per capita is likely to shrink by 5.7% in a 2-year period up to the end of March 24. That's the sharpest rate since 1957. And this despite the fact that inflation in Great Britain is not expected to be quite as high this year as it was in the previous. Accordingly, the inflation rate, which rose to 11.1% in 22, is likely to fall more quickly than previously assumed and amount to 2.9% at the end of the current year. Motorists benefit from the fact that the British government does not initially want to raise the mineral oil tax, as Chancellor of the Exchequer and Finance Minister Jeremy Hunt said on Wednesday when the budget was presented in Parliament in London. At the same time, a fuel discount of 5p per litre of petrol and diesel introduced last year is to be extended by 1 year. This will save the average driver around £100 over 12 months. However, commentators criticized that the government would have invested the £6 billion better in the ailing NHS health service. Jeremy Hunt wants to boost the economy with special economic development zones across the country. The Minister of Finance, on the other hand, rules out tax cuts. So Jeremy Hunt wants to boost growth in times of tight budgets with targeted structural aid. In his budget speech, which was held on Wednesday, the Conservative head of department spoke of a budget for growth, as can be seen in, just have a look on YouTube for the parliamentary session. For this purpose, special economic development zones are to be identified in the country. And in addition, Hunt wants to alleviate the shortage of staff in the labour market by creating better framework conditions for childcare. Since Hunt is committed to reducing the mountain of debt of £2 trillion, there is not much room for manoeuvre in the budget planning. The unfunded tax cut plans of former Prime Minister Liz Truss and her Finance Minister Kwasi Kwarteng led to turbulence on the capital markets and a fall in the British pound in the autumn. Truss had to take her hat after around 6 weeks at the end of October. Her successor Rishi Sunak has embarked on a course of, let's say, consolidation. Unemployment in the UK is at an all-time low. However, companies complain that the number of economically inactive Brits of working age has risen by a good 500,000 compared to pre-corona levels. However, the British economy has also lost many workers in recent years due to the country's exit from the EU and a more rigid migration policy. Hunt's announcements were part of the budget he presented to Parliament, and this included a £94 billion aid package to ease burden on citizens this year and next. And in addition to the plans for childcare, the electricity and gas bills are to be subsidized for a further 3 months at least. According to estimates by the Conservative government, inflation, which is currently still over 10% in Great Britain, will fall around to 2.9% by the end of the year, as I earlier said. Contrary to earlier economic forecasts, Great Britain is technically not in a recession this year. In the UK, a shortage of workers from the EU after Brexit and a record number of people on long-term sick leave 1.1 million unfilled jobs still. However, the Conservative government has signalled that it is not ready to negotiate fair and responsible wage increases with the unions until the strikes that are happening as well now end. Against this background, Hunt has already rejected calls from Conservative MPs for large tax cuts. I said that earlier, but that's important. Instead, he wants to focus on patching weaknesses in the economy. The economy in the EU dropout country is lagging behind other leading industrialized countries. Great Britain is the only country in the G7 group where the economy has not yet returned to the pre-COVID level. According to the newspaper Guardian, Hunt wants to promote the free use of daycare centres in England with billions. UK childcare is one of the most expensive in the world, according to the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. The government will cover the costs to make it easier for parents with small children to participate in the labour market. Another starting point for boosting growth is the establishment of so-called investment zones I mentioned earlier, with which 12 English areas outside London should each receive £80 million for economic development. This aid, stretched over a period of 5 years, is intended to give companies tax breaks or else to invest in education and transport routes. In view of the high cost of living on the island, with an inflation rate of still more than 10%, it is also expected that it was expected and it happened that Hunt extended the fuel tax freeze. Hunt faced a strike by the doctors, teachers and other public sector workers on Wednesday, demanding higher wages in one of the largest coordinated strikes in decades at the same time. Accompanied by widespread strikes, the British Finance Minister presented his plan. And that must have been a scenery for him. In view of the high cost of living and inflation, the package might be popular, but commenting on the strikes, Hunt said, "We will continue to work hard to resolve these disputes, but only in a way that does not further fuel inflation." So he's keeping up the old myth of rising inflation by wage rises there. To relieve the population, there was just this aid package that had nothing to do with these strikes. And as I said, it was about electricity and gas bills and subsidies and state funding for childcare, but nothing for the fight with the unions. But Hunt said, in the face of a cost of living crisis, we have proven our values by protecting troubled families. I'm not so sure about that. But hundreds of thousands of teachers, young doctors, BBC journalists, civil servants and London Underground drivers were on strike. Hundreds of civil servants chanted near Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's official residence on the biggest day of action since the wave of strikes began last year. Healthcare workers in the UK have been protesting for months for wages that keep up with inflation, but also overwork from labour shortages. And as I mentioned earlier, it's 1.1 million shortages for workers and unfilled jobs after Brexit. The Conservative government has signaled that it's only ready to negotiate with the unions over fair and reasonable wage increases after the strikes have ended, and whatever they mean with that. The government also wants to help the battered pubs, though. To this end, the taxes on draft beer are to be frozen. From August 1st, taxes on draft products in pubs will be up to 11p lower than in taxes in supermarkets, is what Hunt told us. British ale may be warm, but taxes on a pint are frozen, he said. However, taxes on all other alcoholic beverages will increase by 10.1% in line with inflation, as previously planned. This is another reason why the industry reacted skeptically. The head of the British Beer and Pub Association, Emma McClarkin, spoke of a step in the right direction. Pubs could now hope for a boost in the summer. However, the measure in no way offsets the disastrous effects of rising inflation and unfair energy contracts on pubs and breweries, she said. Hunt spoke of a Brexit pub guarantee. The British exit from the EU made such an aid measure possible in the first place, he said. However, commentators pointed out that Brexit has hit the industry enormously, for example, because workers from the EU can no longer be employed due to stricter immigration rules. In Great Britain, the number of pubs has been falling significantly for years. Reasons include the high beer tax and the smoking ban, changed drinking habits and cheaper alcohol in the supermarkets. And the COVID pandemic has exacerbated the problems. The exploding energy prices have added and were a blow to the pub owners. Incidentally, according to rushed polls, by the way, by the YouGov Institute, the Conservatives will have 23% of the vote and Labour 45% in the next election. And this was made after the speech of Jeremy Hunt, as far as I got it. And so the Conservatives are not really making any progress, no matter how much they promise with the tax freezes and with the beer prices and whatever. But the biggest problem, as I mentioned several times in the video, the trouble with the union, they are not doing anything. And that will keep them in trouble for quite some time if they don't change their minds. And just another reminder, on Saturday on Outside Views Games and Outside Views Spiele, there will be the first videos that are a game on both of my gaming channels in English and in German. I already put the links to the channels in the description of this video. So if you don't want to miss the first game on the Outside Views Games or Outside Views Spiele channels, just subscribe to them, then you'll be notified when they come up on Saturday. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.